You're listening to the Warriors of Dystonia podcast, a podcast sharing the stories and journeys of people whose lives are affected by dystonia. My name is Carl, and I've had cervical dystonia since 2007. I started this project to spread awareness of the condition, as well as reminding those in the dystonia community that they are not alone. In 2021, I released a book called Warriors of Dystonia that collects first-hand experiences of people all over the world who have been affected by dystonia. You can find the book on lulu.com, that's LULU.com, as well as Amazon. All profits from sales go to dystonia charity and research. Now, on to the podcast. In this episode of the Warriors of Dystonia podcast, I was joined by the fantastic Sara Jane, who took the time to share her experiences of living with cervical or neck dystonia. A chat that I found personally cathartic, as there were so many aspects of Sara Jane's journey that matched my own. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for being on the podcast, Sara Jane.
Sure thing.
So to start off with, could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you?
My name is Sara Jane Bales. I'm an academic and a theatre artist. What that means, I write about, make, teach and mentor in the field of contemporary theatre and live art. Some people don't know what live art is. It's kind of all different kinds of performance that aren't theatre, but that are still performed live. I started out as a theatre practitioner. In other words, I did a degree in theatre and English and I always wanted to be a performer. I was always an artist of one sort or another, either a pianist or a poet, or I got into dance, then I got into fine art, and then finally at art college, I sort of found performance was the one art form that had it all. So all these different artistic activities, I loved literature, I loved reading, I loved writing. Theatre had every single one. And I think when I discovered theatre, that was it for me. You know, I fell into place when I went to art college and I really discovered theatre, and I discovered experimental theatre and interesting theatre. I'd already done Shakespeare like everybody and been put off theatre by all the kind of traditional conventional stuff, although I thought it was very powerful. And then I discovered this amazing playwright. He's Irish, Samuel Beckett. Some people know him. Many people do. Many people do not. And when I discovered Beckett's work, that was it. Fast forward. So then I made a lot of theatre for a number of years. And then I wanted to go back and study. So I did a master's and a PhD in New York in performance studies. My switch from being a practitioner to becoming more of an academic is tied to my story with dystonia and cervical dystonia. So I'll come back to that. So basically then, you know, everything came together for me because I could then become an academic who both made performance and taught my students how to make it and could write and think. So I'm really interested also in social justice and human rights and animal rights and equality and equal rights. So a lot of my work is kind of critical theory and social justice work, but in the fields of theatre and performance. So, you know, I like to think that I want to be making work and teaching students in ways that make change for the better in the world. And I've never thought of theatre or any of the arts as this kind of fluffy realm over here where nothing happens. Absolutely not. It's one of the most radical realms you can work in to instigate change for the better. So that's what I do. And I teach theatre and performance at the University of Sussex. And so I've been doing that for about 20 years now.
When it comes to your dystonia then, how long have you actually had it, and how does it affect you?
I can't believe this number when I say it, but I am 56. And I don't, you know, like so many older people, I don't feel like 56. Nothing in my life is 56, except for my age. I've had it since I was 29 years old. So I'm going to be 30 years with dystonia by the time I'm 59. And I'll have then had it for more than half my life. It's constantly changing. That initial diagnosis, which came back in 1996, when I was living in London, the way it affects me continues to change. Okay. And I think that's the same for everyone. But to begin with, I went from just having a sort of usual neck, with aches and pains and things like everybody gets. But basically what happened for me is one morning I woke up, I sat down to meditate on a cushion. At the time, I was doing quite a lot of Vipassana meditation. I'd just done this 10-day silent retreat, 10 hours a day meditating, and you don't speak for 10 days. And wow. I was really, really trying hard to practice that meditation in the mornings. And I was literally, how I remember it so well, is I was sat on my cushion meditating, and my head, I mean, you can see me do this, but I'll try and describe it to you. My head just went back. It was as if someone behind me had a string and was pulling my head back. So I just righted it. I put my head forward. I pulled my head back up again, kind of moved my shoulders around. I'm very body conscious because I'm someone who's trained to perform. I did a lot of physical theatre, and I'm not by any means a kind of mimey physical theatre person, but I really know how to be in my body, and I understand my body, and I can hear my body. And so my neck just kept going back, and it just wanted to stay there. That was a totally freaky thing. It was so freaky. It took a while to realize it was coming from the muscles. So I kept writing it, but then what I noticed is when I tried to write it, it would go into a sort of a tremor. And I kind of thought, well, this tremor is coming from the fact that the muscles are fighting each other. I didn't have any kind of vocabulary for it. Yeah. So it was cervical dystonia, to the left, pulling to the back. And there begins, how many years is it now? 27 years of a thing that has shifted and changed and got worse and receded and got better and got worse. And what I would say is it was one of the things that made me give up performing, because adrenaline makes it worse. Stress makes it worse. It didn't take me long to realize that. And before you go on stage, anybody who's a performer will know it's not rocket science. You get really stressed and you get stage fright, you get shakes, you get anxious, adrenaline is going around your system. It goes bonkers, and that would exacerbate the symptoms. So the release of adrenaline would make my dystonia worse. And I found myself on stage trying to keep still, and I couldn't keep still. And it's one thing to not be able to keep still, in company with your friends. You and me we could wobble around together.
Absolutely.
Company, and we could do all our leaning on the wrists. Yep. I'm always sitting with my head yeah. the wall. And we were talking about this the other day, everywhere. A student said it to me, actually, who I saw on Saturday. She said, you're always so chilled and relaxed, SJ. Your head is always you're always leaning on the table. And the extent to which you sort of can cover it, in everyday life, and you cover it because it's more comfortable to do that. It's more comfortable to release your muscle from being in a tremor. It's not, I'm embarrassed. It's both, but you do it because you just, everything can breathe again. You can't do that when you're on stage. And I would be standing at the back in this production I was in at the time, and I had to stand really still for a long time and look interesting and enigmatic, but not be center focus. But I had to be there very still. And there was this flat. You're standing against a flat. They're not real walls. They're called flats. And so they're just made of, thin wood propped up that looks like a wall. And I remember that my head was banging against the flat and making it rattle. That production was on at Battersea Arts Centre in London. And I just remember I could not wait to get off stage. I was mortified. So it started to be very distressing for me. And so, I shifted gear. So I've just shifted gear a lot throughout my life to try and absorb it and not have it be this massive problem that's kind of dominating everything.
How long did it actually take you to get a satisfactory diagnosis?
Things were so different in 1996. And that is so hard for us all to remember. But there were no smartphones, there was no internet. I had something like a computer, but it was the size of a television and it just had black and white sort of code on it. But it's all pre-internet. And Dystonia in 1996, well, it was only the 80s when they started to use Botox, right? Just the general awareness, if we think it's poor today, I mean, there was nothing back then. I went to a doctor. Luckily, I was in London. I say luckily just because I think I come from rural Herefordshire, right near the border of Wales. I know that you come from Wales. Mm-hmm. I think, my God, if I had been being diagnosed back in Herefordshire in Rossall-Noir, it probably would have taken a lot longer. It would have been even more complicated. But I had a pretty good GP who took me seriously. I think that's the thing. If a GP doesn't take you seriously, it's probably going to stall forever. And I think it's difficult because often a GP doesn't know what you're talking about, but they've got to cover that they don't know what you're talking about. So I think they're in a difficult position too. But my GP, by the time I went to see the GP, I remember saying, this is crazy. My head is being pulled back. I can feel whispering in my neck. That was how I described it.
Yeah.
He said to me, what do you mean whispering in your neck? I said, it's like there's things crawling up and down, but inside my neck. It's like I can feel fluid. And then I started to get tingling in my left arm. And in a way, the tingling in my left arm was a godsend because it was the thing that made them all take it very seriously. Because if you get tingling in your left arm, either your legs or your arms, and you're in your late 20s, it's one of the primary sort of symptoms, one of the symptoms for MS.
Okay.
And with the tingling in the left arm and the fingers kept going a bit numb, it was really strange. I got sort of fast tracked to a neurology department at St. Thomas's in London. And this is probably over a series of 6 months or something. And I went to see that neurologist, but that neurologist was a general neurologist, not a movement disorder neurologist. And neurology itself is a massive field. As you know, we occupy a tiny little thing over here that nobody's ever heard of really, and it's not MS and it's not Parkinson's and it's not motor neurons disease. It's not one of the biggies. But this neurologist, it was like a process of elimination. So the very first thing they did was give me a brain scan to find out, really to clear me for MS, because MS shows up in the brain straight away, and to clear me of a brain tumor or anything like that. They knew it was neurological. The symptoms all suggested something neurological. The muscles, they already said that's because something's wrong in the neurons that are controlling the muscles. So then it was just about trying to figure out what the hell it was. And that neurologist at St. Thomas's says, I'm really out of my depth. You don't have a brain tumor. You don't have MS. I'm going to pass you on to Queen's Square, the National Hospital for Neurology, because I think you need to see somebody who deals with neurological movement disorders. And at that point, I think I even went privately, in the sense that I got put on a waiting list to see a neurologist called Dr. Andrew Lees, who's quite well known in the field of dystonia. I can't remember, I think he's retired now. And I remember, stumping up the 80, 90 pounds as it was then, which was a hell of a lot of money, so that I could see him quicker. And meanwhile, I was distressed. I was really distressed, this thing with my head going back, and it just felt weirder and weirder. I just didn't know what was going on in my body. So it was probably six months to a year. And then I saw speeded up by paying. And I remember so well going to see Dr. Andrew Lees, and I remember where his office is, because I go to that hospital. I'm now treated in that hospital. Years later, in 2011, I ended up being referred back into that hospital, and that's the movement disorder clinic that treats me, is in that hospital. But whenever I go for my Botox now, I walk past the offices where I sat in 1996.
Wow.
And I remember he did all these neurological tests, all these kind of like the finger to the nose, the closing your eyes, the testing your eyes, the knocking on your knees and watching a finger, trying lots of different things, having to write spirals and say something at the same time. So all sorts of really strange. I thought, how can you tell anything from doing this stuff? Drawing spirals and like watching a finger. But at the end of that session, he said to me, the good news is you don't have X, Y, Z. The bad news is you have dystonia. I mean, it was devastating, because he said it's a lifelong condition. I mean, just those words to me were like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
I'm 29, a lifelong. And then I sort of half remember not hearing and not hearing what he was saying. He said, you're in very good company. You're an actress, aren't you? Well, Katharine Hepburn, have you seen Katharine Hepburn? And I remember us having this bizarre conversation about Katharine Hepburn, who had this head tremor like that in all her late films.
Okay.
And he said, you have the same thing as she has. And she does. She has this head tremor.
Wow.
But I've since researched it, and she didn't have cervical dystonia. She just had head tremor. But, he was very sweet in the sense that he was trying to make me feel comfortable. He was trying to make me feel okay about it. And he gave me an address written down on a piece of paper. This is the Dystonia Society. You should write to them, and they'll send you their pamphlets and their leaflets. And they literally were like 2 pamphlets on sort of very cheap paper folded up. And you had to write off and send, and they sent you a little pack, So that was it. I sort of wandered out of there stunned. And luckily it's in Bloomsbury. It's in a really beautiful part of London. And I just wandered around a few little squares and sort of sat, and it took me a long time to take it in and to work through, anger, denial, resentment. I remember I was seeing someone at the time who was called Carl, but with a
it's more cool with a K.
It's much more cool with a K and a kiddie after it.
That's
too.
it, exactly.
Yeah, very good. But Carl was a drummer in a band, and I met him at yoga, and poor Carl, I think it was really hard, because I took it out in that relationship a lot, and I was so distressed when I look back, because I didn't know how it was going to change my life, but I knew it was already changing my life. I knew I already did not want to be on stage anymore, and I didn't know anyone that had it, and I was so young, and there was so little information. But what I found really quickly, and I already talked to the consultant, Dr. Andrew Lees, he said, is there anything you've noticed that helps the symptoms? And I said, well, yeah, when I have a drink, I can't feel them. I can't feel it anymore. It just drops. And he said, yes, that is absolutely usual in patients with cervical dystonia. And, in small quantities, you can and should use that for medicinal purposes. And I think I was telling you the other day, when we were first talking. It's in my diagnosis letter. And, it's typed. And this young lady, this charming young lady, this charming young actress who came to see me today, and then I have advised her to take a small glass of red wine at luncheon. It's almost in that kind of language, but it says that. And then basically he referred me he referred me back to my doctor and back to St. Thomas's, the original neurologist who I'd seen. And then I went on to clonazepam, because the symptoms were distressing me so much and nobody really knew what to do. So they put me on clonazepam, which absolutely knocked me sideways. Then in the next year, I was changing my life a lot at that time. And then everything changed massively for me, because I applied to a master's and a PhD program in the States, in New York. I applied for a Fulbright scholarship, which is this incredible scholarship, which if you get one, it covers everything. It pays for all your postgraduate study and your flights and everything. And I got one. And so then my whole life kind of shifted direction, and off I went to New York.
You've touched on you're taking, or you're having Botox injections, and the other medication, was it called clonazepam? Do you mind if you could tell us a little bit more about the sort of treatments that you've tried?
So back in the day, clonazepam, or Klonopin, they call it in the States, was the sort of go-to drug that they prescribe because it's neuropathic. So any medication you have for dystonia, and I'm always trying to describe this to people, because people are all saying, oh, I've got a bad neck thing too. Have you tried acupuncture? Have you tried a hot water bottle on it? And I have to bite my tongue, because, people are only being nice and trying to understand and trying to get alongside you. But anyone who's got a neurological condition knows that you can't treat it in the way you treat other things, because it's a problem that's seated in the brain and in the nervous system. So you've got to target the nervous system to stop the problem. Our symptoms show up in our muscles. Our muscles are contracting, but they're contracting because they've got overfiring motor neuron signals going to the muscles saying, contract, 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 and they shouldn't be contracting. So other than Botox, which paralyzes the muscles, you've got to get to the brain. If you get to the part of the brain where you're numbing or suppressing the nervous system, you're probably also suppressing the person. Mm-hmm. So the person is going to be a bit knocked out. So anything from the diazepam, clonazepam, temazepam, anything in that family of drugs, as I've come to know, they knock you out. It's Valium. It's kind of strong versions of Valium. So for me, the drug route was really complicated, because I think I'm very susceptible to meds. So anything that I take has a really strong effect on me. Before I left the UK to go to New York, they had just started me on clonazepam. So we're now 97, August 97. And I remember seeing the neurological team before I went off, and it was quite scary for me, because it was like, I've got this weird thing called dystonia, and I'm now about to move to New York where I know nobody, and I'm going to start a master's and a PhD. What am I going to do about a medical team? And the Fulbright Association were amazing, because they helped me. I had to get into a medical system straight away when I got there. In those first couple of years, it was all over the place, and I was still figuring out what to do with it and how to manage it. But I was on clonazepam when I went, and they took me up it in small incremental doses, because it's really strong. And then I remember that I was a bit gaga. I don't know how to say it. That's such a stupid expression, but like, I'd just do lots of strange things. My short-term memory was crazy. I seemed to not have a short-term memory. So I'd speak to someone in the morning, and in the afternoon, I couldn't remember that I'd spoken to them that morning. I was 29. I'd be in the library and I'd be working, and I'd go to the loo and I'd take my glasses with me, my reading glasses, or I'd take something with me. I'd put it down. I'd completely forget it was there, and I'd walk back into my desk. So I was leaving things in places all the time. I was forgetting very short-term things. My coordination, my sort of bodily coordination was a bit out. So I was tripping more. I was bumping into things. It was just a weird set of things. And my moods were really strange. I sort of slightly didn't know myself.
Yeah.
And so the neurologist team I then saw in New York, in a way I was lucky, because I got in with a neurology team who really knew what dystonia was. They said they thought I should come off the clonazepam and I should try Botox. I didn't know what the hell it was, and I didn't like the sound of it at all. And injections in your neck. Like, what?
Yeah.
And it's going to paralyze your muscles temporarily. What? And all I could think of is, but my jugular vein is in my.
Yeah.
Like, what? So then, but then of course, when you're on clonazepam, it takes a long time to bring you off it, because it's highly addictive and you're highly dependent. And I got terrible headaches as I was coming off it. So came off clonazepam onto Botox. And I remember going to the hospital and they wired me up to this machine. An EMG, that's an electromyography machine. They stuck all these things in me and they were measuring the muscle contractions. And I remember like lying with my head sideways, and he'd stick a needle in and there would be no signal. And then he'd hit one of the muscles that was contracting and it would just go crazy. Wow. And so he was trying to find where the muscles were that were contracting. I felt like a pincushion. It was awful. But I was beginning to understand more about my condition, and that was helpful. To fast forward a bit, I went on to very low doses of Botox, very low. I know that now because of the quantities that I'm on now, which are pretty huge compared to back then. But it was very new still, and they were trying to see how little they could get away with giving me. But it was so little that I'm not sure it was terribly effective. And I also had occupational health, because do you remember I talked about having a tingly arm and numbness? That was still going on quite a lot. I had quite a lot of dull ache in my left arm. It was really weird. So I was having occupational health things, going to hospital twice a week, doing these occupational health stuff. So it carried on like that. I came back to the UK in 2003, and I'd tried a few different drugs, little bits of Botox. I'd stopped the Botox. I didn't think it was doing anything. And I was I'd go through phases of just trying to go it alone. Yeah. I just think, oh, this is all bullshit. None of this is anything. And then I'd sort of go it alone for a bit. And then I'd be like, this is terrible. I need help, and then it would be like, well, I'll just have a few drinks. But then it was like, I have a few drinks and then I'm out of it. So I can't enjoy not feeling my symptoms. Yeah, I'm just out of it. So it's just these circles of like trying to manage it, and then I probably went through everything. I've always done a lot of yoga. I've always kept really fit. I did tons of Ashtanga yoga, which is very hardcore. And I would do 3 Ashtanga yoga classes a week. And I was absolutely ripped from doing Ashtanga yoga. And actually, my Ashtanga yoga, I think I look back and that was what kept me straight in New York, was this very intense yoga practice that really took control of my muscles. But then, and massages, but you have to be careful with massage, because massage can cause a lot of damage if they try and release the muscles that are cramping. Mm-hmm. You can't make a muscle stop doing it if the signal is coming from the brain. they tell you always to be really careful with your massage therapist unless they understand dystonia. And I understand that now. I think yoga worked for a long time, but I've often had lower back problems. So sometimes I couldn't do my yoga because of my lower back problems. I think your body changes as you're growing older as well, what you can do, what you can't do, your levels of fitness, what you feel like doing. Then I became a gym bunny for a while when I moved to Bristol. There were no good yoga teachers. I thought they were all rubbish when I moved to Bristol. I was such a snob because I'd come from New York, and I'd had all the best Ashtanga yoga teachers. Nothing was good enough, So I thought, don't be making yourself miserable by not finding your yoga teachers from New York. Do something different. So I did something different. So I joined a gym, a Canon's gym, and I became absolutely obsessed, with gym and spin and body pump and swimming. And so I think actually keeping myself fit and healthy, but really actually it's more being in your body in a certain way that takes it back. I think that was very important for me. Then it was just getting worse and worse. And by 2005, I'd started to go to French Hospital. I was with another neurological team now in Bristol. And I started to have Botox in 2007. And I would say I needed it by that point. It wasn't a choice. It was like, get me out of this miserable pain. And I can't take the drugs. And meanwhile, I had tried various things, clonazepam, baclofen, amitriptyline. I stayed on an amitriptyline for at least 6 or 7 years. And that's a drug that they prescribed. I have to always look up the word. It's anticholinergic. And it's something to do with something in the brain and the neurons, that the anticholinergic drugs are really good for people with dystonia. So I kept on this drug amitriptyline, which amitriptyline is prescribed for tons of things. In higher doses, it's prescribed for depression. In lower doses, it's for things like muscular movement disorders. It has an antidepressant in it too. So I kept going with it because the doctors would say, the neurologists would say, stick at it for the anticholinergic in it. And I was like, okay. So I don't know if it was doing anything or not. I didn't like being on medication unless I really thought it was doing something, because I just, who wants to be on medication if you don't have to be, And it made me really, I feel like it made me really dopey. I feel like it made me depressive, because it depresses you. It sort of depresses you in some way. And I would take it at night, because if I took it in the day, I just felt like I was, not all there quite. I don't know, but I did stick at it for a long time. 2007, I moved to Brighton from Bristol. I stuck with my team in Bristol. I would go every 3 months to French Hospital because I loved my medical practitioner. And I won't say her full name, but she was called Sue. And she was just my nurse practitioner. And I had the joy of consistency. She saw me every time I went to clinic. And I would travel all the way back from Brighton to Bristol, which is a long schlep if you don't have a car, then to Bristol, then you have to get buses out to French Hospital. It was a huge palaver. But I did it because it really matters when you've got dystonia to find practitioners, medical practitioners, who are compassionate, who understand it, but who understand you. Who are you? We're not all the same. We've all got one thing in common. We've got this dystonia thing, but we're such different people with different lives. And what would suit one person is not going to suit another person at all, in terms of the treatment, and also the lifestyle that they feel they want, and their dignity, and what's important to you, and all of that. And Sue really got me, and she was on my side. She practically would tear up when I was tearing up. I could see it really hurt her when the injections hadn't worked, and I would be back in clinic 3 months later, having like been just like crawling the walls for a month, you know. I could see how upset she felt. And so she referred me. Eventually the journeys were too long. And she said, I really feel like we're beyond our expertise now with you and your dystonia. And I want you to see Professor Bhatia at the National Hospital for Neurology in Queen's Square. And I think we should try to get you into his clinic. And I'm going to write a letter to your GP to recommend that clinic. And one, it will be much closer for you because it's 50 minutes up to London on the train, and there's 4 trains an hour. And 2, you'll be in the top movement disorder clinic in the country with one of the most renowned, excellent movement disorder clinic neurologists, Professor Bhatia. And that's what happened. And it took 6 months, I think, for the referral and the wait. But then there I was in front of Professor Bhatia. And at the time, I remember I was very wobbly, and my head was just pulling back, and the tremor was there too. And that was 2011, and it's now 2022. I have tons of Botox. I probably have enough Botox each time I go into clinic in my neck and in 7 different places. I probably have enough to keep 600 women's faces free of wrinkles for a year.
Brilliant. And how long does each injection last? Each session of Botox, how long will that last for you?
Well, the thing about Botox is it's like everything with dystonia. It is completely, consistently different. It never acts in the same way. The dystonia is shifting around all the time. I go through good patches, I go through bad patches. So how long it lasts depends on if it's even going to work.
Right.
And sometimes I've been injected and it's the same quantities into the same spots. It's even the same person injecting. It isn't always, and that's a problem I'd like to talk about to a negative thing, if you like, but I'd like to talk about the consistency of practitioners, because I think it might be helpful for other people with dystonia just to hear that. Mm-hmm. But let's say it works, which it did this last time. So it's just been amazing the last 3 months. It probably kicks in after about a week to 10 days.
Okay.
And then there's a sort of 6-week sweet spot where for about 5 to 6 weeks, everything just drops away. And over the years, what's happened for me, I guess after years and years of having Botox and muscle atrophy and carrying dystonia, I can't really turn my head properly to the left anymore. And I need to have people on my right hand side. When I'm walking, I always do a little dance, so I'm on this side of a person, because I can't, that thing where you're walking along with someone and talking and you're kind of looking into them. I can't do that. Yeah. And if someone's sitting to the left of me at a table, I can't really talk to them unless I turn my whole body around. I can, but it's really uncomfortable for me and the muscle doesn't want to go. It's like a 6 to 8 week period. And then it's kind of wearing off again. And then by the time I'm at 12 weeks, sometimes I'm climbing the walls and I get into clinic and I burst out crying, or I'm angry, or I'm both, or I'm just abject, But usually I'm a combination of angry and upset. But really the anger is just my absolute frustration at the pain.
Yeah.
And the exhaustion of carrying chronic pain, and the exhaustion of carrying chronic pain and having to be at a laptop all the time, which is the worst thing, because I can't keep my head still. My head isn't supported and all my work is at a desk. And, for me, it's really painful to have to stay still and be at a laptop and type. That can be really, really challenging for me when I'm in a bad patch. And that's my work. I'm a writer. a teacher, my work is here on this laptop. So yeah, when it works, I think it can be really successful. My quantities of Botox have gone up over the years. When I started, I was on something like 40 units of Botox. And that means nothing. It means a lot if I tell you that now I'm on 750 units. Right. Most people know Botox because of it being used to inject women's faces or people who don't want wrinkles. Mm-hmm. So you inject the muscles and the wrinkles go because the muscles go into paralysis. But a facial Botox is something like 18 units.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
I'm having 750. So you're talking about completely different scale. You're talking about 7 injections full, being targeted into very specific muscles. I have some here in these muscles, hyper extend. So I have it in here, I have it in here, I have it up there, I have it up there, I have it in the sternocleidomastoid, mastoid. This one, masses in this one.
Wow. Okay.
This is the big bugger. This is the one that's just you got to laugh, haven't you? Yeah. It's crazy. I had a massive tattoo done on the whole area that caused me pain.
Yeah.
My big thing that I did for myself was at 29, I got this massive, beautiful vine drawn over the whole area. It goes all over the back and all over all the muscles. And it's like this vine that just holds that whole area.
Yeah.
And for me, that was such an important thing to do, was to have this, what for me, people don't like tattoos, that's fine. But for me to have this beautiful thing drawn all over this area that caused me so much pain all day, every day. I don't like the word reclaim it. So, it's kind of too sentimental or something, but I just had to take hold of it with my own tenderness. Mm-hmm. And make it beautiful, this thing that was causing me so much pain. So I had more injections on it. I just had to on it. So and that, that really worked for me, having that done. Every time I saw that, I know I don't usually see it until it gets to the summer, and then there it is, and people are saying, "Oh, look at that beautiful tattoo on your back," and I'm like, "Aha, yes." You have to have compassion for yourself if you've got it, because we get so frustrated and angry with ourselves when we have dystonia because it won't go away. I think it's very hard for people to understand what it's like to have a part of your body that you can't control anymore. And okay, it's not flying all over the place, it's not really extreme, but it's intense and it's focused and it's constant. And it's by your head, and you can't ignore it. You can never ignore it. You have to absorb it in some way.
How have friends and family been with regards to your dystonia?
I mean, in a way, that's the hardest thing to talk about. My dad had dystonia, but I say because he died last year, but he wasn't diagnosed until way later than me, and he had blepharospasm in the eyes, but he lived in Llandudno, and the treatment that he had and the stories he would tell me about his treatment, I would be like, Dad, we got to get you to Queen Square. Mm-hmm. They said, what? Crazy shit. Treatment is really patchy, and so that can be difficult, I think, for us all to talk about, because some people have a terrible, I feel lucky, and it's by no means perfect treatment. But the other thing that is difficult to talk about is the reception of it from family and friends, because I don't want to alienate anyone, or I don't want to criticize anybody, because you do what you can in life. I think people never want to talk about things that are difficult, whatever it is, whether it's personal stuff, whether it's mental health stuff. if you've got a chronic condition and it's with you for life, you don't want to talk about it all the time. You know, I don't. When people ask me, how's your dystonia? I'm like, what? How's my dystonia? How do you think it is? It's still there, isn't it? You know, so some days it's like that. Other days, all you want is that they ask you how your dystonia is. But the thing is, when they ask you how your dystonia is, this is half the problem for me. I'd like them to have the patience to listen, the patience to let me explain what's going on without them jumping in to say, oh, I know what it's like to have a bad neck, or have you tried this? The questions that I wish people would ask me, they never do. And so that's why I get fed up of it, because when people say, how's your dystonia? They want you to respond in the same way as when they say, how are you? Yeah, not so bad. I find it's sort of like, how's your dystonia, but please don't go on too long. How's your dystonia, but I don't really want to know because I don't really understand about it. How's your dystonia? Oh God. So I wish that people, friends and family for years now had taken more time to sit down with me and say, tell me what it is. What is going on? What does it feel like in your body? What does it make you not want to do? What do you find embarrassing? Instead of which, people do things like, I say I've got dystonia, and they say, and this is in like very public place, oh, do you want me to carry your bags? And I'm like, did I just say I had a lower back problem? Yeah. I don't think I did. And that's because there's a big gap between like, how's your dystonia, and then like understanding what it is that's going on for you. And, you know, a lot of the problems for me have become sort of social, and they're mood affecting. I don't know if you know about this, but in the last 5-6 years, the branch of medicine that's looking at the non-muscular symptoms of dystonia, cervical dystonia in particular, has gone through the roof. So they're doing way more research now into the non-muscular symptoms. So the way it affects our sleep, the way it affects our mood, the way it affects cognition. Does it affect cognition? Are there certain processing things? So there's a whole number of symptoms, because it's a new frontier dystonia, cervical dystonia, because they're still relatively young, you know, and because they don't get a lot of money for it, because it's not one of the biggies and it's not life-threatening. I've become so socially much more insular, and I don't like social situations anywhere near as much as I used to, unless I'm drinking a lot. And, you know, I don't mind drinking a lot, but I also really have to watch my alcohol quota, because it's easy for us all to become dependent on it. It's even easier if you have a medical condition and it helps suppress your symptoms. So I feel like I really have to watch drinking too much wine. And when I go into social situations, I just want to neck it, because I want to get to that stage very quickly where I'm symptom free. And that means a couple of glasses of wine. I think it's hard, because with people, I wish I had more people who were close to me, who understood it and could take the time. And for me, that's family and friends. I have a couple of friends who've really got the hang of it. They've got the measure of it. They know that they always have to be on my right hand side. They put themselves on the right before I have time to move them to. They are looking out for me when we go into restaurants, and I'm looking and I'm thinking, shit, if I'm not at the head of the table, I'm going to have trouble, because I just need to be facing everybody. And then I'm going to have to cause a stand and say, hey, would you mind if I sit in this? And I'm always, now they're going to think I'm being really demanding. Now they're going to think I'm being this. But if they all understood more about my dystonia, they'd know that these are very simple things that can make my life so much easier. When you sit me in a chair, can you sit me in a chair which has something to lean my head against? There are some really simple things. And yeah, I think it's hard, you know, and it's probably to do with awareness. You're starting from zero with everybody. I have never met a person and they've said, you know, dystonia, what's that? And they know what it is. Never yet in my life have I met anyone, except for one occupational health practitioner who eventually, in my work situation, finally, after years and years, they gave me an occupational health diagnosis, a long consultation. And I came on the phone to the consultation. It was during the pandemic. So that gives you an idea of how long a wait it has been, because it's only in recent years. But when I came on the phone, I said, well, I've got this dystonia. And I said in this slightly disparaging way, I'm not expecting you to know what that is. And he said, I know what dystonia is. And he was kind of slightly affronted, you know.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, God, I'm so sorry. I know that sounds really patronizing, doesn't it? But I'm so used to people not knowing. Gosh, no, he said, I know. And then he proceeded to tell me what he understood about it, what he knew. So I think it's hard, isn't it? Because, yeah, I don't know what the answer is, because you don't want to spend the whole time talking about it. You don't want it to dominate discussions. I don't want people to have pity. I do want people to be compassionate, understanding, patient. If I need to lie down because I just need my head to rest, you know, I'd like to be able to do that. I'd like to be able to do all of those adjustments without, you know, planes, going and traveling in planes. That's another one that's become a real issue for me, because I need to settle on a plane before everybody else gets on, because I can have trouble with my luggage, and, you know, I can find it difficult, the getting into the seat and the getting the thing up. And if there's people who are really intolerant of you, and yet I don't want to ask for a wheelchair. I do not need a wheelchair. But as someone who has an invisible disability, I need to board the plane first, get help. And so I run into difficulties all the time where I need help or I need an adjustment, but nobody knows what I'm talking about. And some people think I'm having a laugh. People don't think there's something wrong with you. That's the other side of the coin.
If you could go back in time to when your dystonia journey began, what sort of advice or wisdom would you give yourself?
I think I wish I'd been more assertive in a way, but then I have been quite assertive when I think about it. I wouldn't give myself advice. I'd give the medical practitioners advice. Because I feel like I did everything I could at the different twists and turns. You know, I adjusted. I gave up performing. I've got a friend who's an actor, Jim, and he didn't give up. He didn't give up acting. He continued. He, years after me, was diagnosed with cervical dystonia. And I've watched him like not give up. And he's brilliant. And he's had a really good career, amazing career. You know, I feel like I've given up on a lot of things. I've hidden myself away. I stopped giving conference papers, because we have to give conference papers and go to conferences as academics. And I used to find that when I stood up to give my conference papers, the same thing, the adrenaline, my head. And I wish I'd felt less shame. You know, I wish I could have felt less shame and been braver about asking for what I need, without going into kind of all these awkward, you know, sometimes I get really aggressive if I've got to ask for something I need, because I assume I'm going to get a no as a response. And so I go about things in a way that doesn't get the best result sometimes. And I wish I could have managed all of that better. because I think if I'd have been able to say, I need this, all the way through, and asked for more support, and felt entitled to more support, but I couldn't have changed that, because things are only just changing for dystonia, for people with dystonia. It's only just beginning to change, and now it's recognized as a disability under the Equality and Disability Rights Act of whatever year it was. Dystonia is now a disability. Yeah. And so, in the workplace, I talked for years in my job appraisals, what do you need? How's it been going this year? What could be better? I would bring it up again and again and again, and it just got ignored and ignored and ignored. They'd send an occupational health person to my office, and they'd say, how are you sitting at your desk? You need a footrest. Yeah. I'd get a footrest. And I'd say I needed a certain kind of a chair, and they'd send me some weird big executive chair, because they wouldn't listen to what I was telling them about my neck. So eventually I resourced the kind of chair I would need, but it took years. I wish I could have found a way to make people listen more to what I was saying and to believe me.
What would you be most proud of on your dystonia journey?
I guess I'd be most proud of the fact that I have achieved what I've managed to achieve, that I did go to New York and I got my Fulbright and I did my master's and my PhD. There was a point where we thought I would have to come home in the middle of my master's because I was in such distress. And I remember meeting with the Fulbright people and them saying, listen, if you need to go back to England, you need to go back to England. And I didn't. So I am proud of having remained working and having really pushed on, especially in earlier years in my career, sort of from about 2012, 13 onwards, once the dystonia was getting worse and worse, and it was being exacerbated by stress at work, because the more stressed you are, the worse your symptoms are. The worse your symptoms are, the quicker it progresses, or the tireder you are, the more the chronic thing is weighing you down. I'm sad that I didn't get the support I needed in critical years, absolutely critical years of my career, when I was in my mid-40s, when I really needed support, when I was beginning to really battle up against the pain a lot, and when medications and Botox or everything was going up, and the stress at work because I was head of my program at the time, and I didn't get the support I needed at all. And so I guess I'm proud of the fact that I still managed to do all of those things, to start to help shape a drama program and to make it successful and to write a book and to get it finished despite the pain, the chronic pain of sitting and typing or sitting still. Sitting still is really hard for someone with dystonia. And I have to just get up and go, and, I have to walk. I have to walk every single day. Walking is therapeutic for me. It's not just like, oh, I need to walk. It's, if I don't walk, I'm going to be in trouble by the end of the day. If I don't move in a lot, I'm going to be in trouble. I'm just going to be more and more and more contracted. That I'm still here, that I am still in the workforce, and that I haven't caved in, that I haven't gone part-time yet, that I didn't pull back completely, and that I've succeeded a lot in my field. I wish I had done more, but I think you just have to accept that you can't do it at the same pace as other people.
Has dystonia had any impact on your mental health or sleep? And if so, how?
Well, I'm curious to see that question, because that is such a good question. And people who have dystonia, nobody would think that mental health and sleep have anything to do with it. So do you mind if I ask you what made you ask that question? Because I want to answer it.
I had seen some things in a little bit of research which suggested that for the type of dystonia that we have, it seems to operate in the same area of the brain. I know from my own experiences with my mental health that I could be having the best day ever, could be absolutely perfect, brilliant. I'm listening to happy music all day. I've been watching great films, perfect mood. And now I've come to recognize these things that I call blips, and it is completely unexplained moments. And it could be a moment in a day, it could be an entire day, never any extended period of time where I just feel really low, really unhappy. No explanation behind it at all. The same with sleep. I can be completely exhausted. I could be well rested. I could be very comfortable in bed, and it's just not happening. I'll either, more recently, it's been a struggle getting to sleep. But more normally what will happen is I will wake up in the middle of the night, and it's like an alarm has gone off. It's like, oh, and I'll actually feel quite refreshed. It'd be like 1-2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm ready to rock. I will make myself go back to sleep. It'll take a bit of time. But prior to my dystonia, my mental health and my sleep was never like this. I would sleep a solid 8 hours, no problem. And generally, I'd be happy enough.
Well, I definitely have a kind of depression and sleep problems that are totally connected to my cervical dystonia. If you have a depression that is part of the syndrome, if you like, or the suite of symptoms that come with dystonia, you are not depressed because you have dystonia. Dystonia produces depression. Dystonia, whatever is going on in the brain chemistry, is producing a depressive disorder in you. I don't mean to be swearing, but sometimes there's an expression that only has a swear word in it. It's a real head fuck for you if you're a person who isn't depressive or isn't used to being someone who has depression. And because it's very hard to understand why that's going on. And the sleep thing too, I was always nocturnal. I was definitely always a night owl, not a morning lark, ever since I was a kid. Fine. That got worsened by being a performer, because you perform at night, your body is absolutely full of adrenaline. You go and you sit in bars and drink afterwards, and you don't go to sleep. You know, you are nocturnal in your habits if you are a performer. Okay, all of that I understand. But the knocking into the sleep from dystonia has been utterly different. Utterly different. I just can't, it's all, for me, it has been as if the mechanism that enables you to fall asleep is broken. That's how it has felt for me. And that going to sleep, no matter how tired I was always going to be something of battle. I'm finally much more on top of it now, but I'm menopausal, and there are huge changes with the menopause that are just like, you know, crazy chemistry things going on. It's really tough and nobody really tells you about it. But because of menopause, I've got other medications and HRT and stuff that's now actually helping with the sleep. So I'm finding, you know, that it's better at the moment. In fact, I could sleep for England at the moment. I when I was first on the medication I'm on now that's to do with HRT and stuff, 10 hours, you know, all of a sudden 10 hours at my disposal. And instead of going to sleep at 2 every night, I can go to sleep at 11 or 12. That's a major difference. And I have these long, deep, uninterrupted sleeps. But those two things, the depression and the sleep, those things on top of a body that is dealing with extreme muscle contractions that can cause your head to tremor, that can cause you to be in the most profound, unending discomfort. Because then, of course, you don't have the tenacity to deal with the day. You know, I've been in teaching situations again and again and again over the years where my tolerance is so much lower because I'm exasperated and I'm self-conscious and I'm aware that I'm not allowed to show anything. And I'm not allowed to say, guys, can you just help me sort this keyboard out? Because if I do, my head's going to wobble. It puts you back together again, sleep. So I think it's really challenging. Thank God that the recent research is focused a lot more on the non-motor syndromes that come with dystonia. And I've read lots of really great articles about it now. And I've sat in on webcasts and, you know, forums and stuff. And the more you read about it, the better you feel, because you feel like you're not on your own. And Instagram's been amazing for that too. You know, I wouldn't have found you wouldn't have found me if it hadn't been for Instagram. And that like-minded community is really important. But I think there needs to be so much more sensitivity and care now around the non-motor symptoms, because they're huge and they shouldn't be underestimated. And then the thing about treatment, I just wish that the practitioners and the medical teams, one, that they would treat it far more holistically. Okay, so what are your psychic needs? What are the non-motor symptoms? What are the physical symptoms? So look at the whole picture. What do we need to do to address the spasms? What do we need to do to think about the depression? What is dropping out of your social life? Nobody does. It's, we are the movement disorder clinic. We only want to inject you with Botox. Then you have to go to your doctor who doesn't know anything about it to try and sort out the other stuff. Then you have to go to this person. I wish we had consistency, and I wish that the medical practitioners would understand that that consistency is key. So if I go into a clinic, I want the same person injecting me, because they know me, they know my muscles, they know what worked last time, what didn't, but they know me as a human. They can talk to me. They've got a track record. They know that 2 years ago, I was in a terrible state and now I'm in a much better state, and they can remind me, listen, you're doing really well now. If I'm seeing somebody different every 12 weeks and they're a trainee and they, you know, they might be good, they might be bad, they might be. So I think that it's so important. And I wish that the medical teams would spend more time talking to and understanding the patients and the patient's needs. I understand so much about dystonia because I've read so much about it for so many years, and I've lived with it for so long. And so I really, really understand a lot about it. And I wish there were ways in which we could be in groups as patients with it, with the medical practitioners, and lobby and talk. And that's what I really wish for.
Before we finish up, is there any messages or anything you'd like to say to friends, family, and the dystonia community?
I guess, you know, everybody in the dystonia community, what I want to say is you're not alone, and we're not alone. And as crazy and weird and dotty and odd and whispering in my neck and like an insect is pulling my, you know, whatever you think, the words it takes to describe what's going on for you, it's really worth it. And it's really worth trying to talk to somebody you can find to talk about it. My dad, before he died, I gave him so much space to talk about it because Dad didn't talk to anybody else about it. I do, and I'm in the world, and I have certain friends, Arabella and Laura. Thank you forever. Thank you forever for the love and the compassion and the patience. And I hope that they will listen to this. I have friends, Dad didn't have that. Plus, he's a different generation. He was 82 when he died last year. He's not a person who talks. And he grew up in a sort of working classy background and what have you. He's not miseducated me, elevated through, you know, he's not that. And it was so good for him to talk about it. I mean, all we ever did was talk about his. He always forgot saying, how's yours? But, you know, I forgave him that. I forgave him that because I had other people. I brought him to London, to the Wellcome Trust, to the Dystonia conference. And I watched Dad meeting other people for the first time in his life who also couldn't keep their eyes open. I think community is really important, and finding a buddy you can talk to about it, that one friend. But, you know, also I would say to the community, we have to have the patience, the courage and the patience to educate people about it. Why would they know? And if you cope well, like I do, it's even harder to see or believe it. But what I point out to people is, yeah, that's because you never see me when it's bad. Nobody does, because I'm hiding. You know, that time when I said I'm not going to come to the pub because I've got to catch up on some work. I wasn't catching up on some work. I was crying and lying on my bed. And, you know, I think you've got to be patient because it's full of contradictions. And so, yeah, reach out, I think. Reach out and know that you're not alone, and we're getting there. As someone who's had it since 1996, we're in good times, and it's in no small part because of people like you, Carl, who are doing the work that you're doing. And it's a tremendous thing to be doing that. And so we've all just got to hold hands and twisted necks together. I also want to say thank you to Professor Bhatia and Amit in my clinic, and Ian and the others who have helped me, just in case they ever get to hear this.
Thank you so much for being on the Warriors of Dystonia podcast, Sara Jane. It was fantastic. It was lovely.
Yeah, it's been really lovely talking to you, Carl. Thanks for making the space and the time to listen, you know, because I've never had this opportunity before.
Thank you so much for listening to the Warriors of Dystonia podcast. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can reach me via the Warriors of Dystonia website, which is warriorsofdystonia.wordpress.com, or you can search for Warriors of Dystonia on Google, and that'll also bring you to my website. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook, and just do a search for Warriors of Dystonia and you'll be able to find me there. I'm Carl, and I wish you all the best. Thank you so much again for listening. Take care.